Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Dan Hiscock, and joining us today from the Australian Army is Major Joel Donkin. Today is Major Donkin's last day in uniform after 41 years' service in Army. On behalf of us all, thank you for your service, Major Donkin, and your contribution to the memorial's continuing story. This evening, we warmly welcome Mr. Scott Lee, Director, Singapore International Policy Division, Department of Defence, and Mr. Tan Yan Wern, Director, Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia 2 and Oceania in Singapore's Ministry of Defence and the accompanying delegation. As always, we welcome the veterans who have served, those still serving, and the families that love and support them. The live stream of this ceremony is made possible by the Return and Services League of Australia and the RSL and Service Clubs Association. And we welcome members who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors to the memorial. Now, if you're able, I invite you to please stand and join in singing the National Anthem. If you wish to and you're able, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of July 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 103,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Lieutenant Victor Thomas Symes Warry. Victor Warry was born on the 15th of July, 1895 in Maryborough, Queensland. He was one of 5 children born to Richard Symes Warry, a businessman, and his wife Sarah. Victor received early education in Maryborough before moving to Sydney, where he attended Newington College. On completion of his education, Victor began working as a clerk for Sydney warehouseman Messrs. Brabant and Co. He was employed in this position when the First World War broke out in 1914. Victor Warry enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force on the 28th of May 1915. He was commissioned as a second lieutenant and was assigned to the 25th Battalion, and soon embarked for active service on the 29th of June aboard the troop ship Aeneas. After a short stop in Egypt, Warry, newly promoted to lieutenant, joined his unit on Gallipoli in September 1915. By the time he reached his comrades, the campaign had descended into a stalemate, and Allied forces were considering abandoning it altogether. As a result, Warry's time on the peninsula was primarily spent undertaking defensive duties in the trenches. Like many on Gallipoli, Warry eventually became ill and was removed from the lines for treatment. He rejoined his comrades shortly after, but could not shake his illness and was eventually evacuated to Malta for treatment. He did not rejoin his unit until the end of February 1916, by which time Allied forces had withdrawn from Gallipoli. His unit embarked for the Western Front, arriving in the French city of Marseille on the 19th of March 1916. The men of the 25th were the first Australian unit to arrive and were given a short period to explore the city. Later that month, they travelled north towards the French and Belgian border, entering the trenches for the first time on the 4th of April 1916. Over the weeks that followed, Warry's unit undertook periods of training behind the lines, as well as short stints on duty in the trenches. In July, the 25th was sent south to the Somme Valley to take part in the advance on German positions around the French village of Pozières. They entered the front lines around the village on the 28th of July 1916 in preparation for an attack under the cover of darkness the following morning. They began their advance just after midnight on the 29th, tasked with taking 2 lines of German trenches on Pozières Ridge. In 5 waves, the men of the 25th jumped the parapets, immediately coming under murderous machine gun fire from enemy lines. As they pressed forward, Warry and his men were hit by enemy's artillery, as well as fire from mortars just as they reached their first objective. By the time they made it to the second trench, the 25th was so outnumbered that they were forced to dig in for cover. Private Herbert Harris, who was also caught in the fighting at Pozières, described the battle. Imagine men dug in a few feet into the ground and shells falling just like rain, trenches blown up and men digging for dear life to rebuild them, or rescuing their comrades who were so buried, and in most cases, the rescuers were also buried by shells. When entering the trenches, we were bombarded with tear and gas shells, which made us wear our gas helmets. It is almost impossible to see and hard to breathe. I have heard officers and men say that the landing and the Lone Pine battle at Gallipoli were a picnic compared to this last fight. Shortly after, they received their orders to retreat to their own lines. By the following morning, the 25th Battalion had suffered some 340 casualties. Among the missing was Lieutenant Victor Warry. His commanding officer described Warry's final moments in a letter to the young lieutenant's mother. He said, "He was most anxious to lead his men and he was allowed to go. He died a true soldier's death and he went under while rallying his men right in front of the enemy's barbed wire entanglements. It was a shell that killed poor Vic. Death was instantaneous. The men of Vic's company who lived through the charge speak very highly of the bravery he displayed. For the rank and file to speak of their officer in that strain is, I think, the highest praise an officer can earn." Warry's final resting place was never found. Today, he is commemorated on the Australian War Memorial at Villers-Bretonneux, amongst more than 10,000 others who have no known graves. Lieutenant Victor Warry was 21 years old. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, among almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. His photograph is displayed today by the Pool of Reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Lieutenant Victor Thomas Symes Warry, who gave his life for us and our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the ode and sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we who are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We'll leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub of Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of the Director, staff and volunteers, thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support during the Memorial's development project. Wish you all a very pleasant evening. Thank you.